To start off with a thought experiment, imagine you're a hominid on the plains of Africa 3.5 million years ago. You're a tiny little Australopithecine afarensis, little brain. Your name is Lucy. And you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator or is it just the wind? If you think that the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator and it turns out it's just the wind, you've made a type 1 error in cognition. You've a false positive. You thought the wind was connected to something and it wasn't. A was connected to B and it wasn't. So that's a false positive, but that's relatively harmless. But if you think that the rustle in the grass is just the wind and it turns out it's a dangerous predator, you're lunch. Congratulations, you've just been given a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool early before reproducing. And we are the descendants of those who are most likely to make type 1 errors, false positives, versus type 2 errors, false negatives. That is to say, why can't you just stay in the grass and collect enough data to get the answer right? And the answer is that predators don't wait around for prey animals to collect more data. That's why they stalk and sneak up on their prey animals, so they can't get enough data. So we evolved the propensity to make snap decisions and make one kind of error more likely than another kind of error, and that kind of error, that false positive, that's superstition. That's magical thinking. That's assuming A is connected to B. It's a true pattern and it isn't, and you're wrong. That's the basis of finding false patterns like God's. Now, what's the difference between the wind and a dangerous predator? The wind is an inanimate force. A dangerous predator is an intentional agent, and his intention is to eat me, and that can't be good. So what we also do, in addition to finding these meaningful patterns, is infuse in them agency. That is, it's alive, it's real, it has intention, and its intention is not good, so I better assume it's real. And this is the basis of animism and spiritism and polytheism and monotheism and the belief in angels and aliens and demons and spirits and poltergeists and gods. Gods are invisible agents who run the world, who control things, who create these patterns, who are these patterns that we use to explain things. All cultures everywhere in the world have created God beliefs. Gods with these that are intentional agents.
Human civilization began by putting purpose and intelligent purpose behind gods associated with the sun, the moon, the planets, the wind, the earth, the oceans. It's been, by one estimate, over 1,000 different gods throughout human history. Mars, god of war, Poseidon, Thor, all the rest. And the really important thing is that all of you are now atheists regarding those gods. The only difference is it's just one that we may disagree about. But 999, we all agree, have been thrown out. And the reason they've been thrown out is they've been buried by the rise of our physical understanding. Science works. And the fact that science works has buried the gods of the wind and the sun and the moon. Farmers now, as I was just saying, when it doesn't rain, they don't pray for rain anymore. They go see a meteorologist. And that's a good thing. In the process, the human condition has improved immensely, and it will continue to improve as science continues to bury the one remaining God. The point is that our current understanding of nature has changed. We've learned things. It's changed and developed since the claims were made by Iron Age peasants who didn't even know the Earth orbited the sun. And therefore, it's natural that science is inconsistent with those claims based on ignorance. And we shouldn't revere those ancient claims as sacred. They're ignorant. And the other thing that's important in this extra God is there's nothing special about Jesus that's any different than the other gods, or any other fictional heroes for that matter. First of all, there's no empirical evidence that he was divine. None, not one iota. In that sense, he shares it with every other god that's ever been proposed. The myths associated with Jesus are associated with all the other myths, and the Bible. The flood myth, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written well before the Bible, exactly the same. The hero of the Bible was asked to create an ark and put all the species 2 by 2 on 7 levels. Same thing. Virgin birth, nothing special about Jesus. Oh, look at all these. They're all supposed to have been born of virgins. The whole story, in fact, take Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, versus Jesus. It's exactly the same. They were both born from a virgin mother. They were fathered by the King of Heaven. They returned from the dead. They transformed water into wine. In fact, they, talked about eating and drinking the flesh and blood of the Creator. They were taken as a liberator of mankind. That story has been told over and over again, and this is just one of the most recent renderings. Nothing special. And the resurrection is nothing special. The myth of resurrection has been around since Osiris. Osiris was one of the major Egyptian gods, and it used to be just the kings in Egypt would be resurrected when Osiris was resurrected. But eventually, in the New Kingdom, anyone could be resurrected with Osiris. I was going to say with Jesus, but it doesn't matter. If they follow the correct religious rituals. The same nonsense. Now, the point is that the fact that these beliefs are in fact being destroyed is related to the fact that the belief depends upon not just time, not just history, and the fact is, frankly, that in the Western world at least, the number of people who have a religious affiliation is monotonically going down. But it depends on where you live. If you were born in the U.S., and you're religious, you believe in the Bible and Jesus. If you're born in India and you're religious, you might believe in Brahman and who's manifest through Gensha. If you're from the Islamic world, you think the Quran is the perfect word of God and Muhammad is the latest prophet. It's kind of interesting that your belief depends on where you're from. But what's great is we live in a world where information is becoming more freely available. And because of that global access to information, we are seeing religion go down, because people are learning that the myths and lies that they've been taught, when they learn about the rest of the world, that other people believe other myths and lies that are inconsistent with their myths and lies. And that's why we're seeing religion dying more and more. There's still many open questions. There's a lot we don't know about the universe, a lot more we don't know than we do. That's the wonder of science. That's why I'm a scientist. But it is intellectually lazy to just stop asking questions and stop looking for physical explanations and just say God did it. That's lazy. We have evidence, reason, logic, rationality, and empirical methods on our side, whereas their opponents have vague hopes and fears. And they're arguing in favor of emotion that's hanging on for its existence by mere shreds of emotional and ideological spaghetti, much like this type provided by the flying spaghetti monster, one of the many equally irrational gods which science provides no support for. But I first want to begin by clarifying the nature of the motion, because the motion isn't science disproves God, it's science refutes God. And that's very important, because you can't disprove a notion that's basically vague and unfalsifiable. There's no way to disprove the notion that God didn't create all of us 15 seconds ago, with the memories of the amusing comments we heard before that. There's no way we can disprove that. Okay, that's really important to recognize, that those kind of unfalsifiable notions are unfalsifiable, as I say. But we can ask, is it rational to expect that that's likely? And tonight I want to emphasize that 500 years of science have demonstrated that God, that vague notion, is not likely. It's irrational to believe in God. Now, to refute God means refuting several claims. One, that are all based on faith, not evidence. One, that God is necessary. Two, that there is evidence for God. And three, that belief is rational. And the point is that the progress of science has shown over and over and over again that all the answers to all those three questions are no, 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 no. Now, my own scientific field is cosmology, and that's a study of the origin and evolution of the universe as a whole. And it's where science and religion sort of confront each other. And creation myths have abounded throughout human history, and science confronts those creation myths. Our opponents, I'm pretty sure, are going to argue first that one aspect of science that supports perhaps the belief in God is this notion that the universe is apparently fine-tuned for life. I hear that a lot. And because it was fine-tuned so life could exist, that is a remarkable and, in fact, cosmic misunderstanding. Because it's the same kind of misunderstanding that led people to believe in special creation for life on Earth before Darwin. It looked like everything was designed for the environment in which it lived. But what Darwin showed us was that a simple proposition, namely that there's genetic variation among a population combined with natural selection, meant that you didn't need supernatural shenanigans. That, in fact, all the diversity of life on Earth could arise from a single life form by natural law. And he didn't know, what he showed was it was plausible based on the evidence. He didn't know about DNA. He didn't know about the details of genetic replication, but he showed it was plausible. And as I'll say, that's where we're at now as far as the understanding of the universe is concerned.
As for atheism, atheism isn't a thing. It's just a lack of belief in God. That's it, full stop. I'm also an A Bigfootist. I'm an A UFOist. It's not a belief system. There's no set of tenets. This is what atheists believe. It's just what we don't believe. We just don't believe in God, full stop, that's it. Now let's talk about something else. If you don't believe in God, but you believe in, say, civil rights, civil liberties, human rights, women's rights, gay rights, animal rights, you believe that people should be treated equally under the law, and so on and so forth, you're probably a humanist or a secular humanist or an Enlightenment humanist, but it's irrelevant. You can be a Christian and believe all those things. You can be an atheist and believe all those. It doesn't matter. So this is a complete non sequitur. This is not an argument for anything because there is no atheist worldview. I think it's very unlikely that there is a God. We can't prove that there is nothing. We can't prove a negative. But just follow a thought experiment here for a second. Over the last, say, about 10,000 years, humans have created about 10,000 different religions and about 1,000 different gods. What is the probability that Yahweh is the one true God and that Amun-Ra, Aphrodite, Apollo, Baal, Brahma, Ganesha, Isis, Mithras, Osiris, Shiva, Thor, Vishnu, Wotan, Zeus, and the other 986 gods are all false gods? So, like me, the rest of you are all atheists. Some of us just go one God further.
Has science buried God suggests that there's one God. There are lots of gods, and science has buried all of them.
Whenever I give a lecture, I show pictures from, let's say, from the Hubble Space Telescope, a picture of a cluster of galaxies. I mean, the poetry of it, well, we've both talked about the poetry of science, but the spiritual inspiration you get from looking at a picture of a cluster of galaxies located 5 billion light years away from us, where every dot in that picture is a galaxy. The light from those stars left those stars before our sun and earth formed, which means that now many of the stars in that picture don't exist anymore. And if there were civilizations around those stars, each of those galaxies contains 100 billion stars. Any civilization that existed around those stars no longer may exist. It just opens your mind to wonder. And so I actually feel very strongly that while science per se may not provide the direct consolation, it can and it should provide a spiritual, not only wonder, but it should provide a consolation. Look, when we talked about this last night, we tell our kids fairy tales to console them. We tell them to make their life fun. We talk about Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, but then we decide that, you know what, it's better for them to know how the world really works. And it may be a little less consoling, but in fact, knowing that they're in control of their lives actually is empowering. And many of us, if you're a good parent, you want to teach your kids how to become empowered. And yet, but religion, and in religion, they're often talked about the flock, the children. It effectively treats you like a child. It says it's better for you to believe a fable than reality. And often when I end a lecture on cosmology, I point out the two things modern cosmology has taught us is that first, you're much more insignificant than you ever thought, and two, that the future is miserable. But that should make you feel good, not bad, because it further enhances exactly what you were talking about. We are so lucky to be alive today and endowed with a consciousness where we, for whatever fortuitous reasons, on a random star in a random galaxy in the middle of nowhere, we are able to evolve a consciousness, live on a relatively quiescent planet. And so I actually think science can provide a real consolation by saying, look, once you accept reality, it's liberating.
First of all, what you've demonstrated is that when you thrust religion down the throats of children, which is child abuse, before they even have these are deep, you know, you're a man who spent most of your life studying the deep questions of theology. They're deep questions. They're not something, you know, you don't talk about libertarianism or conservative ideals to a 3-year-old. But you force this down when they're a 3-year-old, it's very, very difficult to abandon those things. It's very difficult for any of us who were brought up in a religious house to completely abandon those notions, because when you're a child, you don't have the cognitive abilities, and in fact, these things just become dogma. But the other thing that you suggest, which somehow this myth that is pervaded by both of you, is that somehow there's this connection between religion and science. There isn't. There are groups that study religion and science, and they talk to other groups that study religion and science. The point is that I have been a scientist for 30 years, and I've never been, not once, to a scientific meeting, a scientific seminar, a scientific class where the word God has been mentioned. It's just irrelevant. As Steven Weinberg says, most scientists don't even think enough about God to know if they're atheists. Look, okay, I mean, it's a stereotype to suggest that people of faith are not good people. Of course, that's ridiculous. And just like it's a stereotype to say people of no faith are not good people, which unfortunately in certain parts of the world is a death sentence because of religion.
Why is it wrong to cause pain to other members of your species?
You can ask
Animals do that all the time.
The point is, all of these things are based on rationality. It's this, the laws of this country are not framed on Christian principles. They're framed on rational arguments about what causes the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people. There's nothing Christian about it, or Jewish about it, or Islamic about it. It's based on rationality.
Too often, you're right, science does not provide meaning for people, or awe, or a sense of wonder. And we do too poor a job of explaining it. Science is presented, mostly by science teachers who are uncomfortable with it, as being something you need to memorize or something you need to do to get a better job, or something like that. Science is not presented as something that provides not just amazing ideas, but a wonderful story, a story that, in fact, for many scientists competes with the Bible in a very effective way, to be blunt about it. And the problem is, and I've gone to a lot of fundamentalist colleges in this country, and I think I've had more impact there when I make the simple statement that you don't have to not believe in God to believe in evolution. And the reason I have an impact there is I have students come up to me that have told me their entire lives, every single Sunday, they've heard the opposite. So the problem science has is, first, that we're not doing a good enough job presenting the awe and wonder of science, but secondly, it is being attacked week in and week out by people who fear it. And against such an attack, the data has a very, when you tell people, if you accept this theory, you're not going to believe in God, people will turn their minds off. And young people especially will turn their minds off. And it's not surprising, therefore, that most people in this country don't believe in evolution, because they've been told a lie. And by the way, that's the reason I had this, that's the reason I had this picture here, by the way. And you should go to the web, go to NASA website. This is not a painting, this is a picture, this is a photograph from Cassini of Saturn. It's a total eclipse of the sun, a scene from Saturn. But the thing that's most amazing, and this projector doesn't have the resolution to see it, if you look at this picture, in that picture, right there, you'll see a little dot, a pale blue dot, which of course is the Earth. And it seems to me that is the wonder we should be telling your kids about, showing them pictures of understanding our place in the cosmos, the Earth, the center where all of our vital trials and tribulations of political battles and moral battles are being fought, is that little spot, that fragile spot in a dark void. I mean, that's the kind of story we should be telling to inspire our children. And I agree with you, we're not doing a good enough job doing it.
Science changes what we mean by words. And it changes that meaning because we learn about the universe. We actually make progress in science, unlike theology. And that's because we can be wrong, and we can learn, and we learn from the universe. So if we ask the question, and I think perhaps the most offensive thing I said, it was initially at the beginning, is that something and nothing are not theological or philosophical quantities. They're physical quantities. Most people recognize that something is a physical quantity, but they refuse to accept the idea that nothing might be a physical quantity, somehow the absence of something. And so what is remarkable and surprising in some sense how there's been a reaction to it is, in this particular book, what I tried to do was not attack theological notions, but celebrate our changing picture of reality, the amazing discoveries that have been made over the last 50 years, some by people here, by my friend Brian Schmidt here, who won the Nobel Prize for his discovery, that have changed completely our picture of the universe and made it plausible, the most remarkable and unexpected thing you can imagine, that you could start with absolutely nothing. That means, unlike the cardinal said, and unlike some people argue, no particles, but not even empty space, no space whatsoever, and maybe even no laws governing that space. And we can plausibly understand how you could arrive without any miracles, without any need for a creator, without any supernatural creation, you could produce everything we see. And I find that the fact that it's plausible, remarkable, in the same sense that I think I found it plausible when I first learned about evolution. The amazing fact that the diversity of life on Earth, which seems so designed and complex, could arise from so simple a beginning. Human beings were clearly programmed by evolution to impute intentionality to the world around them. Meaning and purpose was infused in all everyday events to make sense of a dangerous, difficult, and uncaring world. So we had rituals behind the sun, the moon, the planets, the wind, the earth, the oceans, in all societies. The rise of our physical understanding has slowly caused us to do away with those many gods. We no longer have Mars, the god of war, Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea, Thor, the god of storms. As Michael has said, everyone here, or maybe everyone, is now an atheist with respect to those gods. And there's a reason for that. Science has taught us that instead of capricious beings, there's an order to nature. And that order does not appear to involve a divinity. There's no need for a divinity. Laws of nature describable by mathematics make predictions that allow us to not only predict the future, but control it without the need for any supernatural shenanigans. And in fact, it amazes me that asking the question, is God necessary, is somehow an evil thing. When we stop asking questions, that will be an evil thing. Science has taught us also that we want to believe, in the words of Fox Mulder. And we should be skeptical of those desires. As the physicist Richard Feynman told us, the easiest people to fool are ourselves. As scientists, we have to train ourselves to be skeptical of wanting to believe. And we should try and overcome our natural tendency to assume special significance to events. And human beings are also inevitably programmed to ask why, as we've heard it. But the why question is ill-posed, because it presumes purpose. It presumes the answer to the question before you ask the question. What if there is no purpose? Does there need to be purpose? And science tells us there's no evidence of purpose. So the why question is ill-posed. Our opponents want to keep the clock from ticking by avoiding the evidence of reality. And therefore, science, by telling us there's no need for purpose, has refuted the need for God, and that's why you should support our position.
The main thing we want to talk about is, what should we do? What's the moral course of action to take? And if that is to be a reasonable discussion, we have to take a few cards off the table.
Such as?
The faith card. We have to take the faith card off the table.
What do you mean take the faith card off the table? I mean, if one is a man of faith, one can't take the gene out.
Well, you know, Lucille says you're wrong. You know who Lucille is? She's a friend of mine. She's always right. I can't play that card in an argument. It's just rude of me to say, you know, Lucille says you're wrong. You say, well, who's Lucille? I say, well, friend of mine, always right. End of the discussion.
But we're confronted today by people who say they know the mind of God.
And
I think quote scripture to reveal it.
And I think the way we should deal with them is to say, well, that's very interesting, because now you've got a real problem. Since the rest of us don't know the mind of God, we can't share your direct line, so you're going to have to do the best you can in a secular discussion about what the right thing to do is. Are you up to the task of explaining to the rest of us who don't have your hotline to God why you're right? And don't just tell me that God told you. We know that. We accept that.
Suppose I'm sitting here, I'm a Muslim, and I say to you, look, book 5, verse 44 condemns apostasy and says the heretic should be put to death. And I'm telling you that this is my holy script, and I believe that is the case. What do you say to me?
I say, well, the fact that it says it in your holy text is an interesting historical fact, but it doesn't settle whether it's right. It just doesn't.
But it settles for me, speaking for the Muslim, that it's true.
Well, it is possible, of course, that many people are simply morally incapacitated for engaging in moral deliberation.
How come? You have to do it. Wouldn't you have to submit that to a scientific test of observation and
if
verification?
They can't hold a discussion, a reasonable, respectful political discussion about these issues without simply playing the faith card, then I guess they have to admit that they can't defend what they're saying.
You said that the Bible is the reason you know it's wrong to kill. I assume that if you believe that, human beings are just too stupid to figure that out on our own. We need some code to tell us. You said that you think that most humans would agree that it is wrong to torture innocent babies for pleasure, although your own Bible says that you should do that. Psalm 137:9, the Bible from which you quoted, said, "Blessed are they which take and dash the little ones against the stones." That word blessed means happy. It doesn't say maybe during wartime there might be some regrettable collateral damage, But the Bible says very clearly that since the Babylonians were anti-God, you should be happy to take their babies and dash them against the stones. So according to your own moral code, you should enjoy torturing innocent babies for pleasure. We atheists and agnostics, and I think most Christians, agree that the measure for morality is not some external transcendent code. The measure for morality is in the real world, and that is harm. Whatever causes unnecessary harm is what we would, by definition, say wrong. Whatever contributes toward lessening or minimizing harm in the world is what we would say, by definition, is good. There's no big cosmic evil with a capital E, as if it were a thing out there. There's no big capital G for good, like there's some cosmic good that we're trying. It's relative to our species and relative to our needs and the things that we evolved to prefer. For example, water. Me giving a glass of water to Matt would be considered a good thing because water is good for his existence. If I gave him a bottle of arsenic, relative to our species and relative to our planet, that would not be a good thing to do. But it's not a cosmic thing, it's relative. We atheists, agnostic, secular humans have a very good natural basis to objectively justify our moral decisions. Not that we all think that moral principles are absolutes out there. It has to do with the real world and real harm. We do have an answer, Matt. There is a good secular natural explanation for the existence of what we call moral values within the natural universe.
Do we have to believe that there is some transcendental spark that is contrary to the evolutionary account in order to explain why we have morality and why we behave as we do, and why occasionally heroic people jump in and save heavy, drowning strangers, although also very often they don't? I don't think we do need any such account. I think we can explain the existence of compassion, concern for others, in the way we have evolved as mammals, as beings who've had to take care of their own children, as beings who've lived in small communities where we're often related to other members of the community and want to save them and support them, and that helps the survival of our genes as well. And of course, as social beings who live in communities that reciprocate, as indeed our close primate relatives do as well. We're not unique in this, and form reciprocal bonds. And there's a lot of research that suggests that the best strategy in these conditions is, at least initially, to help strangers. And only if it turns out that they are not going to help you, do you then cease to help them or even pay them back for the bad deeds they do you. The simple ethic known as tit for tat works quite well in game theory that models evolution. So it's possible to explain why we do some of the rescues we do in those ways. Some people perhaps have this to a stronger degree than others, and therefore are more likely to do the rescues.
Science doesn't just tell us about the world, it makes the world a better place. The worldview that I would argue guides most of you in this room today, including those of you people of faith, those spiritual values of any educated person today are largely the worldview given us by science. Your worldview is vastly different than it would have been 4 centuries. By stripping ecclesiastical authority of its credibility on factual matters, which we've certainly done, we cast doubt on its claims to certainty in matters of morality, which is great, because we now think that women are equal to men, that we don't hate gays, all of the stupid myths that are permeated by various religions. The facts of science, moreover, force us to take responsibility for the welfare of ourselves, our species, and our planet. And that is what we need to do in the 21st century. Is there a way forward for humanity? Should it be a return to God or a completion of the secularization process? Clearly, if we look at the challenges of the 21st century, what we need are rational approaches to global warming, to the need for civilizations to work together to meet our needs together, instead of having the divisiveness and hatred, which is obviously an empirical result of religion if we look at human history.
We're born with original sin. God could just forgive the sin we never committed, but instead he sacrificed his son Jesus, who is actually just himself in the flesh, because Christians are monotheists. So the only way to avoid eternal punishment for sins we never committed from this all-loving God is to accept his son, who's actually himself, as our Savior. So God sacrificed himself to himself to save us from himself. This is barking mad.
Which deity is not capable of saying, well, Mr. Hitchens, I notice that you, even on penalty of hell and condemnation, will not agree to worship me. You've been told what the odds are, you've been told what the stakes are. They must have impressed you in some way, but you say the evidence isn't good enough and the reasoning is even worse. And would not the sort of deity that you might expect Dinesh D'Souza or Mr. Taunton to respect say, well, I make some allowance there for a little intellectual courage, perhaps. Maybe a little moral integrity. No, you bet wrong. You're going to be tortured, not just for a long time, but forever. This is why I think I can close by saying that religion, as offered to you by its advocates, is immoral and irrational, and that the tyranny that it proposes you live under, fortunately, has no evidence to support the idea of its existence, and that by this discovery, and this alone, we are made aware of the truth, and that truth can make us free.
What finally baffles me is the way our society, all of our society, has limply bought into the idea that faith should somehow be treated with exaggerated respect. As I said before, even secular individuals have come to accept the idea that faith should somehow be immune to criticism, simply because it is faith. Where you would gladly criticize somebody's political views or their artistic taste or their football team or their views on hunting or gun ownership or something like that, when it comes to faith, we are all expected to back off and say, no, we can't criticize faith. It isn't done. It's not good manners to criticize faith. Well, I think it's about time we started criticizing faith. The truth is that without this convention of good manners which pervades our society, faith couldn't withstand criticism because it has no resources with which to do the withstanding. How can you defend a position when there are, by definition, no arguments in its favor? So my suggestion is that we should henceforth abandon our social convention of automatic respect for religious faith.
Science and spirituality are complementary, not conflicting, additive, not detractive. Anything that generates a sense of awe may be a source of spirituality. Science does this in spades. I'm deeply moved, for example, when I observe through my 8-inch telescope in my backyard the fuzzy little patch of light that is the Andromeda Galaxy. It's not just because it's lovely, although it is, but because I understand that the photons of light landing on my retina left Andromeda 2.9 million years ago, when our ancestors were tiny-brained hominids roaming the plains of Africa. So what science tells us is that we are but one among hundreds of millions of species that evolved over the course of 3.5 billion years on one tiny planet among many orbiting an ordinary star, itself one of possibly billions of other solar systems in an ordinary galaxy that contains hundreds of billions of stars, itself located in a cluster of galaxies not so different from the millions of other galaxy clusters themselves, whirling away from one another in an accelerating, expanding cosmic bubble universe that very possibly is only one among a near infinite number of bubble universes. Herein lies the spiritual side of science, the scientuality, if you'll pardon an awkward neologism, but one that echoes the sensuality of discovery. If religion and spirituality are supposed to generate awe and humility in the face of the Creator, what could be more awesome and humbling than the deep space discovered by Hubble and the cosmologists, and the deep time discovered by Darwin and the evolutionists? Darwin matters because evolution matters, and evolution matters because science matters, and science matters because it is the preeminent story of our age, an epic saga about who we are, where we came from, and where we're going.
Look at the alternative we are forsaking. The alternative is a truly open-ended, unconstrained discourse about the human experience. I mean, the fact is, people have spiritual experiences. You've used this word transcendent a lot. Who knows what that means? The reality is, it is possible for a person to close their eyes and use their attention in a certain way, such that they no longer feel separate from the universe, say. You know, they felt it was just me a moment ago, and then all of a sudden there's just the world, okay? That is an experience that is replicable, that we can all have, that many of us, I'm sure, have had. Most people, most of the time, have had these experiences in the context of a religious tradition, and they have interpreted them by the light of their religious tradition. The problem with this process is that it is not, in the scientific spirit, encouraging of rigorous honesty. It is encouraging of dogmatism and metaphysical speculation. And yes, there are diamonds in the dunghill of religion. I mean, it's, you know, Rumi and Meister Eckhart are attesting to a kind of experience that I think we should all be desperate to have. The problem is we need to talk about it honestly. And I think the first thing you can notice about this is if a Christian is having a glorious experience of self-transcendence, and a Buddhist is having a glorious experience of self-transcendence, one thing you know for certain, the best interpretation of that data can't be that Jesus is the Son of God put here on earth to redeem our sins. I mean, it does not authenticate what the Christian thinks it's authenticating. It doesn't authenticate what the Buddhist thinks it's authenticating. We no longer have a right to our religious provincialism. We just have to talk straight.
Even as Verdi wrote his Requiem, he didn't believe in God. He didn't need to believe in God to produce that beautiful music. It isn't true that secularism can't produce a cathedral or an opera. It is true, however, that a secular civilization will have to keep what is valuable of the beauty and symmetry of religious art and devotional architecture, while rejecting the supernatural and the superstitious. You see, the supernatural and the superstitious are not the same as the numinous and the transcendent. I don't come before you, atheist and materialist as I am, as someone who simply says that Douglas Wilson and I are two competing bottles of Dr. Pepper. Nor do I come before you as someone who says I was created out of dust, or as the Quran would say, out of a clot of blood. That I'm an abject serf, that I'm a piece of nothingness fashioned out of garbage by a capricious, tyrannical God. That's even a worse insult. I'd rather be Dr. Pepper than that, I have to tell you.
Me too.
But now let's contrast the numinous and the transcendent to the superstitious and the supernatural. Francis Collins, Christian believer, great physician, great scientist, great humanitarian. He goes on a long hike into the mountains, and he comes to, on his hike, to a point where there's a triune waterfall, a 3-in-1 waterfall falling, and yet arrested in its fall because it's frozen. It's a frozen water trinity. He says, in his own account, he says, at that point, when seeing it, I fell to my knees, and I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. Some of you may have had similar experiences, I don't know. I'm immune to this kind of thing, but I'm not indifferent to it. It is, of course, very beautiful to see a three-fingered frozen waterfall. What if it had been 4 fingers and not a trinity? Would he not have accepted Jesus Christ as his personal Savior? Let's be serious. This stuff is not true. It is superstition. It is the way the mind searches for form and will find it if it's looking for it, and looks for symbols and looks for miracles and revelations where they're not really there, and is terribly easily satisfied by tiny little bits of pseudo-magic. But if you want to be awe-inspired, ladies and gentlemen, and let me just tell you that those of us who do not believe we are divinely created, let alone divinely supervised, are not immune to the idea of awe and beauty and the transcendent. Let me invite you to look for a moment at the pictures taken by the Hubble telescope. Some of you may have done it. If you haven't done it now, or yet, do it soon. The extraordinary revelations of swirling, yet somehow beautiful new galaxies in color and depth and majesty, like nothing I think the human eye has ever seen. Turn away from that if you wish, and gaze at a burning bush in an illiterate desert part of the Middle East and say that that's where revelation comes from. I don't believe you'll be able to do it. Or read a page of Stephen Hawking on the absolute magnificence and consistency and underlying beauty. As Einstein says, the great miracle of physics is there are no miracles. It all carries on, holding together all the time. There are no interruptions in its order. There are no suspensions of it just to please Joshua or just to please some sect or tribe or group. No, it's much, much, much more impressive than that. Hawking has a colleague who looked at the event horizon of the black hole. If you could travel towards a black hole, in theory, the event horizon is the point at which the black hole is pulling everything into itself. So over into the black hole goes light itself. It's so strong it can pull light back into itself. It's really awe-inspiring. A lot more, say, than a crowd of pigs infested by devils running down a hill into the sea, which is a piece of sorcery and cheap magic of the sort that shouldn't impress any thinking person. Think about a black hole instead. Pulling the light into itself, the event horizon just reorganizing nature. So that if you could get to that lip, the lip of that event horizon, and fall in and go in, you could in theory see the past and the future stretching before and in front of you. You would see time, except you wouldn't have the time to do it, of course, if you were a mere primate, as we are. But Hawking has a colleague who says if he knew he was dying of terminal illness, that's how he'd want to go out, is over the lip of the event horizon. That would be majesty. That would be magnificence. That would be awe-inspiring. That would be apocalyptic. So it's in the natural world, it's in the world of science and the world of innovation and discovery and doubt. We wouldn't have discovered any of these things if we'd taken the religious story for granted to begin with. We would have said we already know enough. We know. God made this. God wants it this way. What's the need for inquiry? We already have all the information we need. The big difference between this side of the house, mine, and the other, is this. I am absolutely certain that I do not know, but that it might be possible to find out, and that doubt and skepticism and innovation and inquiry are the only means by which wonder and beauty and awe and symmetry will be discovered, and beyond those peaks we can yet see, new, more wonderful peaks will rise. Whereas, on the Wilson side of the house, it is said, we already have the certainty. We know that God created us, and we even claim to know his mind and what he wants of us. And I just invite you to open your minds to the possibility that the skeptical and the inquiring and the doubtful will be better than anything that calls itself faith. Because anything that calls itself faith calls itself certainty. And for certainty, I think there is no place in an institute of intellectual mentation and higher education. And I'm very grateful to you all for giving me the chance to say so.
Only one species knows what it is made of, atoms belonging to a known list of elements, and it knows what atoms are made of, up quarks, down quarks, and electrons. Only one species knows how to discover such things, the scientific method which belongs to all humanity. Faint hearts find it a bleak and cold conclusion that we are machines made of atoms living finitely on a rock spinning around an ordinary star hanging in a vacuum in the suburbs of a galaxy, one galaxy among billions. But the universe owes us no comfort, and there is a savage nobility in standing up to face the truth. I cannot think of a better way to enjoy our transient brush with reality than to work at understanding it. Science is the poetry of reality, zenith of human achievement, jewel in our species' crown.
What I've run into in talking about Islam specifically among atheists is a sense that we're somehow logically committed to being equally opposed to all religions, irrespective of their effects. So to sort of single out Islam from the point of view of atheism is somehow to be co-opted by by bigotry, by an alliance with Christians. But I mean, there's nothing that demands that we not notice the different consequences between different faiths. I mean, anyone who is just as worried about the Amish or about Anglicans as they are about Islam is just reading the wrong section of the newspaper. So, I mean, clearly Islam imposes a unique burden on us and on just rational people everywhere to criticize unjustified belief.
But actually, we're accused of the reverse very often. I mean, the so-called fatwa envy, where we're accused of going after Christianity, and Christians with some relish sort of say, well, you don't go after Islam, do you?
Yeah.
And I think we need to discuss that, because it's true that the threat of having your head cut off is somewhat of a deterrent.
My experience has just been that only Christians, serious Christians, really get the problem of Islam. Because when you talk to secularists about the problem of Islam, you get a lot of people who just don't believe that jihadists really believe what they say they believe. It's all politics, it's all economics, it doesn't really have to do with an expectation of paradise. When you talk to serious Christians who, Sarah Palin-style Christians who believe their own craziness, they have no doubt that the Muslims believe what they say they believe. And they're motivated based on a rational fear of Islam. So, but I think we just have to talk about what is obviously reasonable to believe insofar as we can see it, and that has the same kind of steamrolling effect over all religions.
I was simply objecting to the way the Judeo-Christian myth has permeated our society to such an enormous extent, as though somehow it has special truths which are not to be found in other myths. And I don't think there's much truth to be found in any myths, as a matter of fact, but certainly there's no reason why the Judeo-Christian myth should be given this privileged status. And as for it not being literally true, of course, sophisticated theologians and historians don't think it's literally true, but 40%, 45% of the American people believe literally in Adam and Eve, believe literally that the world is only 6,000 years old. I mean, that's a shocking figure, and you can't duck out of it by saying, oh, sophisticated theologians don't believe it. Unfortunately, what sophisticated theologians believe isn't really relevant to what the majority of Christians do believe. Nick Cohen has just written a rather good book called You Cannot Read This Book, which is about censorship. And one of his attacks is on Western liberals, who are all fine and liberal when it comes to all sorts of good causes in our Western society. But when it comes to anything to do with another race,
and especially when it comes to Islam, they suddenly pull back and say, oh, well, of course, it's part of their culture. We have to let them do whatever they like. And so if they want to beat their wives or whatever it is, then it's part of their culture. It must be allowed to happen. In Britain, there is, I'm told on good authority, plenty of female genital mutilation going on in England. It's against the law, but the police turn a blind eye for fear of being thought racist and Islamophobic. So do you think there's a problem here, that we've got to stop being so afraid of being thought racist and Islamophobic and got to come out and apply our liberal principles elsewhere in the world, not just in our own country?
Yes, Richard, I think, and this is what I've been saying for the last 10 years or more, if you think through the logic of racism, if little girls of 7, 8 years old cannot be protected by British law, then you start to wonder what exactly is racist. If the genitals of little white girls were being cut off, there would be enormous outrage. But they just... So this shyness and this self-imposed embarrassment about, oh my goodness, if we protect human life from true suffering, then we will be thought of as racist. Then once you think through that logic, then you come to the conclusion that by doing nothing, you're being worse than racist. In many ways, you're actually being complicit.
Now, to the point about religious activism. Isn't it true, haven't you all heard, that Hamas does so well because it supplies social services? Never mind that they're religious, they distribute services where otherwise there'd only be secularism and corruption. Well, if you want to claim that, you can't just claim the charitable part of it, it seems to me. Mother Teresa, endlessly praised for work that most of the time she actually never did. I went to watch her very closely in Calcutta. You don't mind that she thinks that what Bengal and Calcutta mainly needs is a clerical campaign against birth control and family planning. Has anyone here ever been to Bengal and concluded that's what it really needs? That's what she was really campaigning for, in case you're worried. But never mind. She gives a wonderful impression of being a charitable person. So what Indians need is more missionaries to cure poverty, when everybody knows there's only one cure for poverty, which is the empowerment of women, which means giving them some control over their reproduction. You name me a Catholic or Muslim charity that goes into the fields determined to secure the empowerment.
Okay,
of
well,
and you'll have the ghost of a point.
Let's see if Frank Brennan...
Until now you don't.
Let's see if Frank...
I'd just like to ask whether, because we're appealing, the premise is we're appealing to people's intellect to believe in something that's rational, but I believe religion actually appeals to people's emotional needs, which is why it's a stronger argument per se, as opposed to the intellectual argument that we are proposing to them.
I think the split between reason and emotion is a meme which should be retired. I mean, yes. I think that there's certainly neurologically no clean line between them, and I would call doubt an emotion and a feeling of conviction an emotion, and so we're constantly played as emotional beings when we are doing the most rigorous reasoning. So it's, but it's true. You can be talking at a level that is inaccessible to people. But insofar as we're talking really about things that people care about, and when we're talking about the well-being of their children, for instance. The talk of science, insofar as it's relevant to that case, is going to be it connects directly with what they care about. I mean, it's emotional in a very deep sense. So it's true that science doesn't have music or something that's hitting that channel, and we really do just have arguments and descriptions about the way the world is. But I think it's when something really matters, people tend to want the truth. It's just there's the burden of communicating the truth, getting over the barriers of dogmatism is often impossible. But people don't want their children to die, so people want to know why their children are getting sick. And insofar as we can make the case for vaccination, say, well, the thing that's humbling is that even making the case for vaccination is damn hard in this world, and the internet has enabled those kinds of conspiracy thinking and pseudoscience in a way that would sort of be unthinkable without the internet. So it's hard to even talk about very important things for which there's a mountain of data when people can just live in an echo chamber and not really consider the evidence.
I'm going to disagree with you about one little thing. You said science doesn't have music.
Well,
but I think it
not
symphonies.
Yes.
But I think one of the things that never ceases to delight me is the wonderful science writing that is out there, with Richard being as great an artist in this as anybody in the world. And this is inspiring. This does have an emotional effect on children and adults. And I think we should recognize that and honor it.
What do you think when you see religious people, when you see popes or rabbis or people who fervently believe, the Billy Grahams of the world, who are sincere and wonderful people?
Yeah, of course.
Who actually may be delusional that they're going somewhere?
No, they're embedded in belief systems. And what I look at is I see all the belief systems, and when you line them up, they're not really compatible with one another. So whatever they're believing, it can't be a truth that applies to everybody, because other people believe what they do with no less fervor. And so I sit back and, as a person who's interested in objective truths, and I say, well, it doesn't look like that's a path towards an objective truth.
Science is not in principle committed to the idea that there's no afterlife, or that the mind is identical to the brain, or that materialism is true. Science is completely open to whatever in fact is true. And if it's true that the consciousness is being run like software on the brain and can, by virtue of ectoplasm or something else we don't understand, can be dissociated from the brain at death, that would be part of our growing scientific understanding of the world if we could discover it. Now, and there are ways we could in fact discover that if it were true. The problem is there are very good reasons to think it's not true. And we know this from now 150 years of neurology, where you damage areas of the brain and faculties are lost. And they're clearly, it's not that everyone with brain damage has their soul perfectly intact, they just can't get the words out. This is everything about your mind can be damaged by damaging the brain. You can cease to recognize faces, you can cease to know the names of animals, but you still know the names of tools. I mean, the fragmentation in the way in which our mind is parcellated at the level of the brain is not at all intuitive, and there's a lot known about it. And what we're being asked to consider is that you damage one part of the brain and the mind, something about the mind and subjectivity is lost. You damage another and yet more is lost. And yet if you damage the whole thing at death, we can rise off the brain with all our faculties intact, recognizing grandma and speaking English. And I think a much more important point is, if everything you're saying about your religious orientation is true, because you're basically confessing a kind of scientific attitude toward the mysteries of subjectivity and what happens after death, then the usefulness of holding to these traditions and these first century books is I'm completely at a loss. I mean, it seems like you're in the wrong line of work. You should be psychology. We're living in a world in which 9 million children every year die before they reach the age of 5. Okay, year after year after year. I mean, that is an Asian-style tsunami of the sort you remember from 2004 every 10 days, killing only children before the age of 5. I mean, think about these children, think about their parents, know that virtually all of these parents are people who believe in God and were praying all the while that their children would be saved. And their prayers were not answered. Now, the afterlife comes into the midst of this reality and as a promise that all of this is going to make sense in the end, that somehow at the end of existence we're going to be all let in on the punchline and have a mighty laugh with Almighty God for eternity. Now, there's no evidence of that, and I think, therefore, that this concept of the afterlife really functions as a substitute for wisdom. It functions as a substitute for really absorbing our predicament, which is that everyone is going to die. There are circumstances that are just catastrophically unfair. And the only justice we're going to find in the world is the justice we make. And I think we have an ethical responsibility to absorb this really down to the soles of our feet. And this notion of an afterlife, the happy talk about how it's all going to work out and it's all part of God's plan, is a way of shirking that responsibility.
It's those of us who doubt the supernatural who have the failure of imagination. And good move. But there's no one who can't play this game. There could be an afterlife and no God. Why not? There could be many gods and no afterlife. There could be a God with a sense of humor where good people went to hell and evil people and evil people carried on as in his initial creation, ruling the roost. I can imagine quite a lot too, but here's what we're meant to discuss, I think. Those who have claimed to know in advance the rules of reward and punishment and the actual details of the afterlife, people who actually have and continue to rule the mental lives of millions of people, who have to explain away things like Sam's 9 million dead children by saying, well, what happens to their souls? St. Augustine has to come up with an answer. He says they go to limbo. At least if they're not baptized Catholic, that's where they go. So millions of people for hundreds of years thought that's where their children were. A terrible form of sadism and mental serfdom that the church is now considering dropping. But that limbo was really real to people when it was imagined for them by a sadistic North African pseudo-intellectual. So it's not a failure of imagination to say that this use of imagination is perverse. Neither Sam nor I have said it's impossible that there be a post-life existence. We've just said that it's not knowable, not that it's not known. So surely the default position must be that it's those who have ever said that resurrection or an afterlife is a dogma who have the explaining to do. For myself, I'm very open to that. I like surprises.
Belief in the afterlife, or at least a profession of belief in the afterlife, gives you something to say in the most difficult moments in life to others who are losing someone or who have lost someone. It gives you something to say that an atheist doesn't have, which, if believed by the one who has just lost their child, for instance, is really consoling. I mean, there is nothing better in terms of consolation than to believe that the child you just lost is now someplace perfect and you will be reunited.
Sam, what would you say? I mean, put yourself on the spot. If somebody in that moment asked you, I'm about to die, what's going to happen to me? What would you tell them?
Well, I mean, I think actually this issue of the one who dies is less... Our fear of death, at least as far as I can tell from a sample of one, is not of our own death. We all go to sleep every night and just disappear. We lose everything. I mean, deep sleep for almost everyone is synonymous with oblivion. I mean, you lose your sensory experience, you forget your life. If you never woke up, you wouldn't notice it. And many people have noticed this, perhaps most famously the Roman poet Lucretius. If death is synonymous with non-existence, there really is nothing to fear, and slipping into it
may feel just as satisfying as slipping into sleep. I mean, there's just that's not what we're worried about. We're worried about the process of dying, perhaps, I mean, the process of being ill and in pain. And we're really worried about losing the people we love while we're alive.
The fact that life is short and that it's going to end makes it more valuable. We give greater value to things that are rare, don't we? Precious metals, precious things. If things are really rare, you can get a big price for it. I was looking for a 1943 copper penny. I thought I had one. I would get like $100,000 for it because it's so rare. When things are plentiful, their value goes down. So if life is eternal, then life is cheap. If it lasts forever and it never ever ends, then it doesn't have any real value that we would call precious. The fact that we face, like you say, we face the reality of the coldness and the uncaring universe that we live in, face it with bravery and with honesty and say, I'm going to die someday, that's going to be it. That actually gives your life more value now as you live it, because you're not sacrificing anything for some future rewards. You're living this life now. Of course, none of us are going to know after we're dead, we're dead. And of course, death is the cessation of a physical, biological organism. So I think most atheists who have that attitude actually value life more than someone like Trent does, because Trent thinks there's going to be this afterlife where everything's going to make everything right. We don't. We got to get it right now. We got to do things now while we're alive, and then maybe have some consolation in the fact that our descendants or future generations will benefit from some of the good that we do now. Ultimately, it's all going to go away. Ultimately, it is cosmically meaningless, but that doesn't mean it is not immediately immensely meaningful to us right now as we live our lives.